Good afternoon, Earth Science students. I made a big mistake today and forgot to record our class session, so I'm just going to go over the things that we talked about in class in this recording. I'm more than happy to meet with you if you would rather go over some particulars together, but hopefully you'll get all the content and all the information that you need here through this review. So the first thing that we talked about today was just sort of asking how you feel about change, because Earth science deals with changes. It deals with changes to the Earth, big, small changes, long-term changes, short-term changes. So I wanted you to get into the mindset of change as our focus for the class. Some things to do. If you haven't already completed these tasks, you need to sign up for our class GoFormative page and use the join code FDJE4R. Your first assignment is an All About Me quiz, and then there's a 1.05 assignment that you'll be able to complete by the end of class today. In class, we reviewed lessons 1.01 through 1.05. If you haven't read that yet, that's okay. I'll cover all of the content in this video. Know that that we always will go over every graded assignment during class time, so you don't need to worry about having the reading done ahead of time, but the reading will certainly support you and help you participate in class. Next up, I shared some information about how to make sure that you can be successful in the class. I recommend reading through our lesson slides, attending Class Connects, where I'm going to summarize and explain things to you. Use some kind of a notebook. You can use paper notebooks, you can type your notes online, you can use my notes if you prefer your own. I've got guided notes that you can use, but all of our tests, all of our assignments are open notes. So have some kind of information that will help you complete those test and quiz questions. Look for hashtag test question. I post those throughout our lessons and they reference things that you're going to see on graded assignments. So keep that in mind as you're going through class and taking notes. All of our classwork is submitted in GoFormative, so make sure you do all of that graded work, and you need to sign up using that join code that I mentioned on the last slide. I do have a YouTube channel, which you're looking at if you were watching this video. The videos and the titles, I try to keep the same as the assignments so that you know where to find them. Also, be sure to complete labs. We do all graded assignments together in class, but this is a science course, and so labs are part of that. But don't feel like that's intimidating. We'll, again, go through everything together. Okay, so all of that, you can get an A. And keep in mind that any work that you do in GoFormative, you can always make corrections. You can always go back and change your answers to improve your score. You can do that until you get 100%. There's no penalty for making corrections, so know that you can bring your grade to whatever you would like. Our goals for the first 4 lessons today were to talk about what Earth science is, what an Earth scientist studies, how Earth science contributes to our everyday lives, explain how old theories can be modified and discarded, and identify important developments that shape our knowledge of the Earth, and then finally give examples of how discoveries in Earth science have resulted in new technologies. So we began talking about the different disciplines that make up Earth science. Earth science isn't necessarily a specific field itself, but it's like an umbrella that includes other things. So again, notice hashtag test question down here. One of the things that I'll ask you about in Unit 1 is, what does an Earth scientist study? They study things like meteorology, so how atmosphere and weather conditions connect to our climate around the Earth. They study geology. Those are landforms, volcanoes, mountains, how the Earth rocks have the shape that they have. Oceanography is part of Earth science. It includes the marine ecosystems and how they interact with oceans. And then also astronomy. So the bodies that are outside of Earth, how they help us understand Earth, how Earth was formed, and what Earth might look like one day. So reviewing those concepts, Earth systems are all the different parts of Earth, and they interact to result in changes to our planet. Those kind of changes can impact our life. So I mentioned a volcanic eruption. If a volcano erupts, that's a part of Earth changing, and that change can impact humans. Those changes can affect us and cause us to maybe create new technologies. Maybe we want to create a warning system that lets us know when a volcano might erupt again. and that can affect our life and make it better, hopefully. And so science is about using our knowledge and using our ability to ask questions to create technology to answer those questions, and hopefully that technology will impact our life positively. Earth science is a type of science, so we use the scientific method. It's an ongoing process. You ask questions, you bring those questions to a form called a hypothesis, which is really just a testable question. When you have that testable question, you do some experiments, you gather data, and you can either analyze that data and figure out that it doesn't quite fit your hypothesis and maybe you need to form a new one, or you might be able to form a conclusion. And really that's what science is all about. Asking questions, trying to figure out why things work the way they do, and then coming up with conclusions or theories that help put it all together. The next thing that we talked about in class was this chart. And so I'll go back and fill in the details for you, but I just wanted to let you know where we're going with this information. So we took a look at a few different scientists or a few different time periods that helped us shape our ideas about Earth's history through investigations. And I have here scientific investigations, but not all of the things I'm going to tell you about are scientific. Some are just maybe ideas that people had, and they weren't really scientifically based. So we'll start off furthest in the past, thinking about what scientific thought looked like before the 1700s. So scientists thought the Earth was young and unchanging. That meant that they believed, based on information they had available at that time, that the Earth was just the way it was. It was always that way, it always would be that way, and that it didn't adapt or didn't change. And the calculation that this Archbishop James Ussher used was based on information from the Bible. He calculated that the Earth was about 6,000 years old, which is not very old. And for the next 100 and 150 years, that's what scientists believed about the Earth. And then the next idea was that geologists started to do exploration and look for minerals that they could mine, so things they could take out of the earth to use, like metals. And they started to notice that rocks were found in layers, like you can see here. And so Nicholas Steno determined that the lowest layers of rock were probably older than the ones that were found above them. And so that idea that there were different ages of rock started to bring to mind that there might be different parts of the earth that are different ages. That took us to 1788 with James Hutton, and he formulated the idea of geological time. This is a whole idea or concept that we'll study in Unit 4, and he believed that geological forces, so the events or the things that happen to the earth, operated in the present the same way as they did in the past. And I realize that sentence doesn't make sense there. But the forces that operate today are the same as the things that happened in the past. So a volcanic eruption today happens in the same way that a volcanic eruption happened hundreds of years ago. And through that idea, he was able to interpret rock layers. He was able to look at the way erosion took place and use that information to help form a story about Earth's past and about Earth's history. That takes us to the 1800s, where the English surveyor William Smith, this William Smith and not this one over here, started to look at fossils that were found in rock layers. And he found that if you saw one type of rock layer, the fossils in that layer were probably the same as fossils in a different layer. And the rock itself was probably a similar age as the fossils that were found within it. And so you could use that kind of information to look at areas from different locations and come up with some information about the age of that land. The next idea that contributed to our knowledge about the age of Earth came from Lord Kelvin. You might know this name or recognize the name Kelvin if you took chemistry and you learned about the Kelvin temperature scale. It's the same guy. And he was interested in the way things cooled, which makes sense, right? He came up with that temperature scale. And his idea was that if the Earth formed in a very hot way. If there was a giant collision that caused Earth to form, and Earth isn't molten hot right now, it's not made of lava right now, but it still has some lava, molten lava on the inside, that he knew the way that it sort of reached the temperature it is today had to do with cooling. And if he could use physics to calculate how long it takes for rocks to cool down, he could come up with an age for the Earth. And so Kelvin came up with an age that was closer to 98 million years, which is much older than the 6,000 years that had been thought of previously. With more technology came more information. So in the 1930s and 40s, radioactive dating started to be used. They discovered radioactivity and so tried to figure out how they could use that to make new technology. And so radioactive dating of different elements helped us understand that some of the rocks that were found on Earth were actually 4.5 billion years old, which again is much, much older than even the 98 million years that Kelvin was calculating. And so all of these ideas bring us to the concept that we used to think Earth was pretty young, and more testing, more and more technology brought us to the idea that Earth is really pretty old. And still today, 100 years, almost 100 years after this radioactive technology was created, we think that Earth is still about 4.5, 4.6 billion years old. And so our ideas change over time. And that's important. That's all of what science is about. Ideas changing based on learning new things, based on asking more questions. The last part of class and the second part of your assignment, or the assignment that you have for 1.05, talks about Earth's spheres. So Earth is a sphere for the most part, and it is composed of these different parts or different systems that interact. So we call them spheres, even though they're not really spherically shaped. But the cryosphere is all of the ice, the naturally occurring ice on Earth. The biosphere is life, all the living creatures and their environments. The geosphere includes the land and Earth's interior. The hydrosphere includes oceans, rivers, and lakes. And the atmosphere is all of the air that surrounds Earth. So let's look a little bit deeper at those things. But we started by looking at some of these examples and seeing if you could connect these different examples with the sphere that they belong to. So for example, in class, we talked about the redwood tree, which is part of the biosphere. Trees are living organisms. A mountain range. Mountains are made of rocks. These are geological features, and they're considered part of the geosphere. One that I think we had a 50-50 split in class was clouds. I would say half of the class chose the hydrosphere. Clouds are definitely made of water, but clouds are found in the atmosphere. So there's an argument for either one of those, and that's good. In the same way, we didn't talk about this example in class, but soil contains part of the geosphere, contains broken down rocks, and it also contains bacteria and plants and even animals, and so it contains part of the biosphere as well. Although soil itself is not living, it does contain living things. Looking a little bit deeper at each of those items, we've got lots of water on Earth, but a very small percentage of that water is frozen. And so that makes up the cryosphere, this frozen portion. That cryosphere includes icebergs, snow, snowpack, glaciers, all of those icy elements. The hydrosphere includes freshwater bodies, rivers, lakes, ponds, streams, and it includes saltwater, oceans, and seas. The oceans are the largest part of the hydrosphere, and they're disproportionately distributed. So this is going to make a difference when we talk about weather and we talk about the way that water absorbs heat. If you kind of draw a line here where the equator is, there's more land north of the equator and more water south of the equator. So it's just something to take note of. Maybe we can ask why that is and know that it does make a difference in our weather patterns. The atmosphere is all of the gases that are around us. If we take a look at this diagram of an apple and think of the skin of the apple as being very thin compared to all of the kind of meat of the apple, it's comparative to the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is just a very thin layer on the outside of Earth. compared to how thick Earth is if you were to dig underneath or to try to go to the center. The composition of the atmosphere is important. We need specific amounts of oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen in order for life to work the way that it does today. The atmosphere has changed. It has not always been this way, and so that's something that we'll also take a look at later in our course. The atmosphere, I said, changes on a long-term scale, so it's changed from Earth's ancient past to today, but it also changes on a daily basis. So we see wind, we see different weather patterns, air masses, and storms that take place, and all of those have to do with changes in the atmosphere. The biosphere is made up of all of the living things on Earth. That's not just people, but it's plants, it's animals, bacteria, everything that's living, large and small, is included in the biosphere. And finally, we have the geosphere. So this is maybe what you think of most when you think of earth science, but it's the rock, the surface, the continents, the seafloor, all of the interior parts of the earth. And we'll work on these in Unit 2, but that includes the crust, the mantle, and the core of the earth. And we'll learn about what these components are in Unit 2. One of the questions that I'll ask, and I do have hashtag test question down here, is for you to select 2 spheres and talk about how they interact. So I've got some examples here. We mentioned we've got the hydrosphere interacting with the geosphere, or you could even say the hydrosphere is interacting with the biosphere, because the people that live here, or even the plants that live here, are going to undergo some big changes. So these parts of the earth can change each other. We have a volcanic eruption taking place. So the geosphere is changing, right? We might have a new crater in the earth. But this volcano is also putting out a lot of different gases, and it's going to change the composition of the atmosphere. And so we have an interaction between 2 spheres. I would like you to come up with an interaction that describes 2 of the spheres and how one can change the other or influence the other. And so that was it for class today. We have the 1.05 formative assessment due today, or you can turn it in tomorrow. And the Unit 1 test will be due at the end of the week. On Thursday, we'll go over that during class time, so I hope you can join me then. I'm sorry about the recording today, but I hope that this video is helpful to you. Be sure to reach out to me if you need some clarification or you would like to meet for a small group session. Thanks.